Hello. We are approaching one of the saddest, perhaps, but certainly one of the most dramatic parts of the whole Torah, which is Moshe Rabbeinu's actions, we'll see, on behalf of the Jewish people, which somehow or other don't work out as he plans, to the extent where Hashem says, you're not going into the land of Israel. And that's pretty dramatic stuff. Of course, the Seder begins with the story of the red heifer, which itself is worthy of our attention, and unfortunately we can't get it all in. So I think I'll concentrate on the story of Moshe hitting the rock, which everybody is aware of. And let me just remind you that every week the Shiur is sponsored, and there is opportunities and abilities to sponsor the Shiur. This week, the Shiur is sponsored for the memory of Yishai Nosson ben Eitan. So if you would like to sponsor, have an Alshich Shiur sponsored in your name or the name of somebody dear to you whom you love, then the address to email for the sponsorship is that one there. It's yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com, and we'll be very honored to include the name of your loved one as the sponsor of the Torah learned that week. Okay, let's get to the parsha. So if we, I've actually got it here for you, so all I need to do is to share my screen, which is becoming something I'm becoming very familiar with doing. And there it is. So if I move it over a little bit, a teeny bit, we should be able to all read this. So here is the story. V'yovo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda midbar Tzin. The entire Jewish people come to the desert of Tzin, the Chodesh Rishon in the first month, the Yeshiv ha'am b'Kodesh, and the people stay in a place called Kodesh, the Thomas Sham Miriam. And Miriam dies there. It's a cover Sham, and she's buried there. V'lo hoya mayim le'eda. There was no water for the people to drink. And the Yikola al Moshe, al Aaron, and they gather against Moshe and Aaron, v'yorev ha'am im Moshe, and they fight, or strive, I think is the usual translation. Well, I've got a translation here. Let's see how, no, I did that. Let's see what they make of that word. And the people quarreled. Okay, quarreled's a nice word. That's a better word. If only we died the way our brothers died in front of God. Lama habesem es kal Hashem elam midbar azelem. That's why you taking us to this place to die. Sham here. And us and our cattle. Lama the son of Israel. Why did you take us out from Egypt, which is such a nice place, and they treated us so nicely? That's not, of course, in the English. Lahabi Asana Elamokim Hara, as I take is a horrible place. Law Mokim Zera, Vasaina, Magef, and Barima, my English justice. There's no fruit here, and there's no grapes, no pomegranates, no water. The other Moshe Aaron in alcohol. El Pesach al Ma'ed, so Moshe and Aaron come out in front of the Almighty, in front of the people, Lipa al B'neim, they fall on their faces. And the Yar Kavod Hashem Alayim. And the covenant of Hashem appears to them. V'yadav Hashem al Moshe Limor, and Hashem says to Moshe, Kach esamat, take the stick. Take your stick, Hakal, the famous stick, with which played such a prominent feature at Kriyas Yamsuf and other places. V'hakal say, and gather the people, out of Aaron Achicha, you and Aaron, your brother, v'debartem l'sel, and speak to the rock. L'neim, and their eyes, and nos and meima v'chatzis lehem mayim minasela, and they will see this, and water will come out, and they'll have plenty to drink. V'heshkisa as eda the esbiram, and will water for the people and for their cattle. Now we all know what happens next. Moshe, instead of speaking to the rock, hits the rock. I mean, that's what Hashem says. That's it. You're not going into the land of Israel. So first of all, in working through this, let's, if I now get rid of my screen sharing and just go back to seeing me, then we should really ask ourselves the question, what's this? Why didn't they have water? What was the whole thing about not having water? So Rashi says something which is very worthwhile our attention before we come to the Alshich explanation, and he says the following thing. So this is chapter Kov. And right at the beginning, I've gone to the end here, and it says in Pasuk Aleph, V'yovu b'nei Yisrael, the Jewish people, come to the Midbar Tzin, and they dwell there, and then Miriam dies, and then there's no water. Is there a connection? So Rashi says, of course there's a connection. And let's look at what Rashi has to say here, and it's tremendously interesting. Thomas Miriam, Lama Nisucha Parshas Misas Miriam, the Parshas Parah Adumah. So the beginning of the parsha, of course, deals with the red heifer, and the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer were used to purify people who become impure through contact with a dead body. It's an atoning vehicle. Consequently, says Rashi, there's a connection between the two, the story of the death of Miriam and the story of the Parah Adumah. He says, Lama Lacha, Ma Karbonos Makchaprin. The story is that just like sacrifices, animal sacrifices are there in order to atone for things that people did wrong, that, of course, by the way, is that the person wants to use the animal that's going to be killed and then subsequently eaten as a vehicle for atonement. It's not that you kill an animal, everything you've done wrong is just wiped clean. No, you're supposed to put your hands on the animal that's about to be killed. You're supposed to imagine it could be and should be perhaps you with the things you've done wrong. That's, as it were, motivates you to do tshuva. That's therefore the death of the animal, the korban, the sacrifice of the animal, is a vehicle for you to see yourself as though it should be you and do a proper teshuva and atone properly. He says not only that, the same thing, af misa tzadikim. The death of tzadikim has the exact same, or can have the exact same result. If noticing the death of a tzaddik, somebody great like, say, well, Miriam, or the Chofetz Chaim, some great leader that everybody totally and utterly recognizes as such, and someone that everybody loves, when they die, the normal reaction is to turn around and say, well, if they're in such a high level, and look what happened to them, how much more so am I likely to die for the things I've done wrong, and therefore you work on that. Again, it's provoking and evoking a reaction, and the reaction itself is going to get the people or the person back on course. That's the first thing. Okay, so that's the connection between the death of Miriam and the previous story of the Parah Adumah. Thomas on Miriam, says Rashi, Av he ben Ashika, she also died by the kiss of HaShem, as did Moshe and Aaron, only 3 people. It says the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, died by the kiss of HaShem. It says it explicitly by Moshe and Aaron. It doesn't say it by Miriam because it doesn't sound sneezy for HaShem to kiss the lady, as it were, and therefore that's why it's hidden. But then it says, or Rashi quotes the bit, and now they don't have any water. Miriam dies, they don't have any water. Says Rashi, Mikan Shakol Arbon Shana Hoyolahem Haber. That's to say the miraculous well that followed them on their journeys, wherever they went, there was suddenly the well was there for them as well. Let me say as well. Then a Beskus Miriam, it was all in the Beskus of Miriam. And when Miriam died, then the thing that was generated in her Beskus stops. But that's problematic. After all, the schus of the others, the schus of the immas, the connection that we have with them, is something that lasts even past their death. If it's your custom in shul, when it's chakras to say, perhaps it's certainly mine, to say a Kedah Yitzchak, to read the part of the Torah which talks about the binding of Isaac, then there's a little prayer that you say after it and say, Rabbanu Shalom. If we've done anything to provoke you, and we deserve to be punished, but remember, the same way that our forefather Avram went against his nature, being willing to, or allowing himself to kill his son for you, and in that schus, in that merit, you go against your nature and don't punish us even though we deserve it. We're calling on a zechus that is over 3,000 years old. We call on it daily. Why should it be deactivated simply because the person who did whatever we're calling on, we're evoking, has died? Avram's been dead for over 3 millennia. So why can't we call on that schus? Why did it stop when Miriam dies? It should be able to continue. The well should have still come in her schus. So there's a commentator here called the Kli Yoker. I know we've not got to the Alshich yet, but don't worry, we will. The Kli Yoker says this. Now this speaks to me, and I would imagine and hope it speaks to you as well. And certainly the facts about to be revealed are very, very important. Outside ha'onish, chosra hamayim, it was a punishment. Indeed, what I said to you just now is correct. The death of a tzaddik and what they've done for Klal Yisrael should not be the end of their connection to Klal Yisrael or the merit that they generate for the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael. However, that's always if you remain connected to them and value them and live up to the values that they exemplified in their lifetime, carrying them forward. But he says, Ad Sada Onish, but if you don't, then it's like a punishment. Because the reason that they were punished is because she died. It's actually, when you think about it, it's explicit in the Pasuk. What does the Pasuk say? Miriam died, and they buried her there. Oh, Miriam's dead. Okay, dig a hole, put her in, Yiskadash, poof, and they moved on. That wasn't the reaction when Moshe died. That wasn't the reaction when Aaron died. They were devastated. The Jewish people were leaderless, rudderless, and heartbroken for a very long time. But when Miriam died, it was, oh, what shame. Anybody got a spade? Dug a hole, and that was that. And they buried her. When you don't value the person you're connected to, you break that connection. And the skills that she should have generated and did generate when she was alive, you no longer recognize it, you no longer realize it, you lose it. That's why it happens. Now that's a very interesting insight. In fact, we're going to see in the Alshich here that I suppose the theme, or one of the enormous themes of this whole story, is valuing your leaders, or valuing our leaders. And it's such a sad indictment of human nature and our human nature. And we all know when Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die, and the Jewish people know that, and all they've got to do is to fight one war against Midian, and that's the end of Moshe Rabbeinu. They refuse. They go on strike. We're not going out there to fight. We don't want to lose you. When he was alive and they thought he would go on forever, they gave him the worst time possible. Yes, let's admit it. Jews are stiff-necked and troublesome. Perhaps one of the greatest miracles that Moshe Rabbeinu ever achieved was the fact that he was able to be the leader of the Jewish people for 40 years. That was tough, with rebellion after rebellion, including this one. However, when you think he's going to die, then the real connection, and then it's a shock to them, and then they regret it very, very much. But here, before we get to that stage, no, we're too busy complaining, etc. And that's where you lose your leaders, as we'll see shortly. Miriam, you didn't value her. You disconnected from her. You disconnect from her Zakus as well. But whatever is the reason, when push comes to shove, as they say in England, at the end of the day, they don't have any water, and something has to be done about that. And HaShem says, okay, let's do something about that. And so let me just point out that what we read before was that there was two attacks here. So let's read that again. Pasuk base. They didn't have any water. Al Moshe vel Aaron, and they gather against Moshe and Aaron. Right. So both of them. There's a complaint against the leadership of both. Why did you bring us to this place? Why did you do this? Your leadership is flawed. You've brought us to a horrible place. But Yorav in Moshe, and then after it says, and they also complain against Moshe. Hashem, if only we died with our brothers died in front of Hashem. That's a reference to the story, back to the story of Korach, at least in front of God, but this horrible place. So the Alshich says something interesting. So I'll now move my Chumash out the way, although we're coming back to it in a second because I want to show you something else in the Mikros Kedolos Chumash, where all the commentators, the major commentators, are on display, and move across to the Alshich HaKodesh himself. And he's got a very interesting thing to say here, or two. Number one is, in the attack in Moshe Rabbeinu, the attack is twofold. It's an attack against both the joint leadership of Moshe and Aaron. And then, as we saw, then there's an attack against Moshe himself, right? So two. So he says, that's why the reaction of Hashem is to tell them to do the following thing. He says, take them, gather them in front of the rock, and both of you shall speak to the rock. Both of you speak to the rock. Both of you speak to the rock, And what they're supposed to talk about? The weather? No, they're supposed to learn Mishnah. They're supposed to learn Torah in front of the rock. And an incredible miracle is going to happen. Water is going to be found there. Now, I'm just leaving it vague because I'm going to go into that in more detail very shortly, exactly what the miracle would be. But that's what they're supposed to do. And the Alshich says something here which is very, very interesting. We saw that they attack both Moshe and Aaron. And then they single out Moshe for attack. In what way are they going to solve the problem? Well, of course, if Moshe and Aaron, whom they're accusing of bad leadership, then speak to the rock and the miracle occurs in this water, then that, as it were, totally destroys the complaints against them. Their leadership, their words have solved the problem that you created, actually, by no longer valuing Miriam and disconnecting from her zechus. However, something more important than that, he says, so therefore, Hashem's command to them is, gather them and give them water. That's why it says, and you will gather all the people. Shiur and they will see what you did for them. They'll feel ashamed of what they've done wrong, which is good. That's a good thing for them to feel. That's that stage of the story. But more than that, when you and Aaron, says the Alshich, speak to the rock and water is produced, that's enough water. But then Moshe will do something else, and that he's going to say so, and then goes on to over to the singular and says, "He called Moshe Aaron," as we said, they gather against them, and then you're going to bring water from the rock, and when you bring water from the rock, I'll read this a little bit to you here. You will talk to the rock where they can see it happening, but nosen memov, and it will give its water. So both of you will speak, and the water will be supplied. And then v'had seso, and something else. You will now do something else. You'll bring more water. So the complaint is against Moshe and Aaron. So Moshe and Aaron will solve the problem that the complaint was erroneously based on. On top of that, then Moshe will, as well, bring more water, an abundance of water that they could never complain ever again. Fine. And it also says le'nehem. There's a Medrash Rabbah here, which is incredibly interesting. The Medrash Rabbah says that how big was the Jewish camp? Right now, when they come out from Mitzrayim, there was 600,000 men, so they had wives. That's marriageable age. So that takes us to 1,200,000. Of course, they had lots and lots of children. So let's make a conservative estimate of 3 million Jews. 3 million Jews, that's big. A lot of people. How big was the camp? How big was the area to accommodate 3 million or more Jews? And the answer is 12 miles squared. 12 miles squared. Very often, but many times, I've been speaking to large audiences, and I'm stuck in the middle with a podium and a microphone, and there are two screens at either side of me. So there's two very large Rubinsteins at either side. The very interesting thing is, incidentally, that everybody always looks at the screens, and I almost feel that I want to say, I'm over here, but of course the other two guys would be saying the exact same thing. But it's a bit like that. How are 3 million or more Jews going to see Moshe speaking to the rock and the water coming out? So the Medrash says this is one of the times when a small area, 4 amos, that's 12 feet by 12 feet, not 12 miles by 12 miles, contained the entire Jewish camp. Right? Zoom, it shrunk. Well, the same phenomenon, of course, is why Noah was able to get all the animals into the boat or the ark, whatever you want to call it, which, of course, as the Ramban points out, could not have contained even one species of bird. It was not big enough at all. They all shrunk. Or when the Jewish people went up to Jerusalem and they stood squished together on the Shalosh Regalim, but when they had to bow down to the Levaida, well, how do you bow down if you're the guy's 1 inch back in front of your nose, 1 inch behind you? How could you bow down? But a miraculous event occurs, and the space was created in order to allow that to happen. Here they all shrink, so they're all standing in front of an area instead of 12 miles, 12 feet square, so they can all see what happens. And that's why the Pasuk says, they will see it le'enehem, right? So let me read that to you just to emphasize that. Kachas amata, Hashem says, take the stick, the hakela se'eda, and the stick is going to do that miracle. Moshe is going to use the stick to do the miracle. After all, he can split the Red Sea. He can shrink the people to be able to see what's going on. Speak to the rock, in their eyes, so that they can see this. Fine. That's what's supposed to happen. And if that happens, that will completely and totally defuse the bomb of the machlokas, the conflict that is broken out. But Moshe doesn't speak to the rock. Moshe hits the rock. Hashem told him to speak to the rock, but he hits it. Why on earth would he hit the rock? This is Moshe Rabbeinu we're talking about after all. Why on earth would he hit the rock? For this, we have to, I'll tell you what the Alshich says in a second, but I want to actually quote the same theme from somebody called the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim in Pasuk Ches says the following thing, and I think this is very, very interesting. Of course, I've got to find the Baal HaTurim. Yes. Actually, no. Where is the Baal HaTurim? Sorry. When I said the Baal HaTurim, I was meaning Seporna. The Seporna says the following thing. He says when it comes to miracle, there were 3 types of miracle, 3 levels, madrigas of miracle. And this is very important. He says, Echod min hagimel panim, one of them is Echod hu nes nister. It's called a hidden miracle. You don't see it happening. And he gives an example. Come on, you read a motor, so you need water at a specific time, or we are in deep trouble, and you daven, and it rains. Well, it rains normally. You don't actually see. This is not like Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the Red Sea. Or he says, for example, we daven, and somebody is sick, gets better. Then, of course, Hashem has altered the nature of the world, or the nature of the person's illness, that it goes away and the person is saved, or the clouds just came along at the right moment to stop us from starving. It's not an open miracle. That's called a hidden miracle. That's Madriga number 1, level number 1 of miracle. Number 2, he says, base, who nes nigla lo yochel hatevel asas oven. Interesting. It's not a hidden miracle, it's an open miracle. But it's an open miracle that mimics nature. It's just that nature could never do it in the same way. So we're talking about the Be'er Miriam, the wellspring of Miriam that went from one place following the Jewish people to the next place that they camped. Interesting. Imagine, instead of being a well that appeared at the next spot, it was a river. Let's say wherever the Jewish people went, the river, they had to go around this way, some rocks, the river followed them. And they walked another 5 miles in a straight line, the river followed them in a straight line. And then it turned to the right, the river turned to the right. And eventually, let's say 40 miles later, zigzagging, etc., as rivers do, that's where the Jewish people are. And this river just runs past the camp, so they have water. Imagine that was the miraculous phenomenon instead of a well. Now, that is obviously an open miracle. But it's an open miracle that mimics something that does occur naturally in normal geological terms. Rivers change their courses. You can see this, incidentally, if you ever walk along a riverbank, sometimes you see the river is going like that way, but there's a huge carving, a furrow or trench in the earth where it used to go. This is called a spur. In the geographic terms. And that's telling you that the river used to go that way, but over hundreds of years, it's changed its course. So rivers do change their course, but it usually takes centuries. But imagine when the Jewish people go, then the river follows them. That's a phenomenon which does occur in nature, but here it's happening in a supernatural way, in a miraculous way, because wherever they go, instead of taking hundreds of years, it changes instantly to follow them. So that would be an open miracle. But it's an open miracle which is mimicking nature. Level number 3, he says, it's one of the types of miracle. What is being required is a miracle that doesn't occur and can't be replicated in nature at all. So what was the miracle? Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to stand in front of the rock. with Aaron. They were supposed to learn Torah in front of the rock. And what was supposed to happen was that the rock, I have one here actually on my desk, occurs to me, I can use as a paperweight. But here's a rock. Now, what area does that rock occupy in space? Do it side on, right? What area? Well, this particular rock, I would say it's probably 3 inches by 3 inches, roughly that, okay? But this was a bigger rock, right? It was a 12-foot by 12-foot rock. That's big. That rock, whatever its shape was, the miracle was that by speaking Torah, that area which is occupied by the rock would disappear, creating, as it were, a cutout in space, which was recently occupied by the rock, with water gushing out of it. That's a phenomenon that never occurs in nature. Obviously, rivers do change their course. You never see a hole in space with water coming out of it. That's impossible. That's the highest level of miracle. Now here, the Alshich says, that's what was being asked of Moshe Rabbeinu to do. To create a miracle of such a status and so impressive that it would squish this machlokas, this rebellion, once and for all. But he doesn't do it. What do you mean you don't do it? Hashem just told you to do it. Yeah, but something happened. From Hashem telling you what to do to make this credible miracle with a space, a hole in space, something happened. And Rashi talks about something. And that is when Moshe Rabbeinu goes with Aaron to talk to the rock, then people, the skeptics, the cynics, not such nice people, the Hebrew word is litzonim, and the Rabban Shem really doesn't like litzonim, mockers, scoffers. They said, where are we? We're in the desert where he used to look after his father-in-law's sheep. He was a shepherd here for 40 years. He knows exactly where the water is, naturally occurring water. And Moshe, not that rock. Do that rock over there. Speak to, or somebody else said, no, over there. And there's groups of people, yeah, no, this rock, making fun of him, minimizing what he's trying to do, and trying to delegitimize what he's trying to do. So that they can say, you see, we told you his leadership's no good. This is not leadership. This is tricky. This is rabbits out the hat stuff, or taking a playing card from behind somebody's ear, sort of tricks that stage magicians do. Because they did that, Moshe Rabbeinu did not think that they were worthy anymore of a miracle at the highest level occurring to them or for them. Now, if they've now gone down in their level, because a tzaddik can only do a miracle relative to the worthiness and the deservingness of the people he's doing the miracle for. Before they made fun of him, then they deserved, as Hashem clearly told him, a miracle at the highest possible level. Speak to the rock, hole in space. But now that they've gone down, well, if I try and do that miracle, and I don't believe anymore that they deserve that miracle, or Hashem will do that miracle for them, and it doesn't occur, there is no water, will that make the rebellion worse or better? Obviously, much worse. So, there's a rule in the Gemara, if you've got a maybe and a definite, always go with a definite. Now it's only a maybe in Moshe's mind if I do the miracle as I was previously instructed to do before this mockery occurred, then it's only a maybe it will occur. And if it doesn't occur, things will get worse. So I'll go with a definite. I'll hit the rock. Water will come out of it in huge amounts. Now, of course, rocks sometimes do. Ask any geologist. Sometimes you can take a rock, split it in two, and it's hollow inside, and there is water in there. That is a natural phenomenon. Now, just a little bit of water, almost like 2 cups held together, is not going to feed 3 million people or give 3 million people enough to drink. However, it's going to be an enormous amount of water that comes out. That's level number 2, like the river changing its course. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Alshich, because of this, decides to go for the safe option. He hits the rock, and water is provided. But Hashem says, oh, you made a big mistake. That was a big mistake. So let me read to you what it says there. So he gets all the people, he hits the rock, he gets the Maim Rabim, out comes the water, and then Pasuk Yud Beis. V'yamar Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron, Yan ki lo himantam bi. since you didn't believe in me, lahakdisheni le'eni b'nei Yisrael, to make my name holy in the eyes or in the sight of the Jewish people, then, well, you're not going into the land of Israel. Well, what did Moshe do wrong? Isn't this calculation right? Wasn't it the right thing to do? The answer is yes, of course it was. Except there's another element there. He was told originally to do this in their eyesight. And we already explained, or the Alshich already explained, that meant that an area of 12 miles shrinks to accommodate 12 feet squared. Here, HaShem says, because you didn't do what I told you in their eyes, the same phenomenon of them shrinking had maintained itself. They hadn't gone back. HaShem still wanted them in tiny size to witness what Moshe was meant to do. Oh, Moshe indeed is worried that they're no longer on the level to decide to deserve the miracle at the highest level. But if that was the case, why are they still shrunk? It was a reasonable concern, but by not altering the parameters that Hashem had set up in order for them to see the miracle, he was indicating to them that he still wanted the miracle done the way it was meant to be done. I have another Alshich to tell you, and then we can put this all together. And that's as follows. When the Meraglim bring back the bad report, if you remember, Hashem says, I'm not telling you if it's a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. But choose yourself, shlach l'cho anoshim. The word anoshim, says the Alshich, means the very greatest. To minimize the danger, they'll bring back a bad report. Shlach l'cho, send for you. It's going to be good for you if you send the very best. That will minimize the possibility of them bringing back a bad report. Because if they do, you're going to have to die in the desert. You're not going to go into the land of Israel. That's the clincher here. Indeed, Hashem says, because you didn't do what I told you, which at his level was certainly a flaw, even if he meant it for the right reasons, then Hashem can justify not taking him or allowing him to go into the land of Israel. However, the strict side of judgment, the midas adin, which demands that he doesn't go in for striking the rock, would have had to retreat in the face of Hashem's rachamim, midas rachamim, his mercy towards Moshe, who appealed and appealed and appealed hundreds of times to be allowed to go into the land of Israel, as he reports in the center of his Hanan. But Hashem is angry, he says, for me because of your sake, or your sake. He wouldn't allow himself to feel pity and mercy towards me for you. Why? So the Alshich says, because it was crucial that Moshe Rabbeinu did not go into the land of Israel and would die outside the land of Israel. For a very simple reason. The spies who brought back the bad report contaminated the Jewish people, or rather contaminated the ones who allowed themselves to be contaminated in believing the false report and gave up hope. That was the men, not the women. Not one woman believed the spies' report, not one woman gave up hope. And as a consequence, that generation of women went into the land of Israel. But the men didn't. They all died outside the land of Israel. Hashem says, well, the Alshich gives a moshel. It's like somebody who imagine, I'll update this a little bit, in Tel Aviv, apartment buildings, and there's a blackout. Somebody's walking down the street, and he drops a couple of pennies, or a penny, from his pocket on the ground. So he shouts, help! Somebody bring me a torch, a flashlight. We mentioned this in one of our previous sharing. Torch, a flashlight, so I've lost my penny. To which nobody's going to get up and go downstairs because this fellow's lost a penny. Who cares? So the fellow picks out a very large denomination bill, a 500 shekling note, and he drops that in the ground and he starts shouting, I've lost 500 shekels. Then that would evoke people's pity. They come down with a flashlight, they're shining at the ground, he finds the 500 shekel note, and at the same time he picks up the penny. Moshe Rabbeinu is the 500 shekel note, and the penny is all the men of that generation that really Hashem would not be allowed, as it were, by the midas adin, to go and collect their souls and take it to heaven. But if he's down there anyway, pick up Moshe Derech Agav, by the way, he can pick up the souls of those people as well. So choose the very best so this doesn't happen to you. So ultimately here, it's, as you can hear, it's a bit narrow. Moshe's motivation is 100% on our side. He doesn't want our guilt in the eyes of God to escalate to the point where he's not going to forgive us at all. And if the water miracle fails, that's exactly what's going to happen. So he takes it on himself and puts himself in danger to make sure that the rebellion doesn't escalate. It's a little bit like the story of Miriam. You see, we often don't respect our leaders, the great leaders of Klal Yisrael, until they're gone. When they didn't respect Miriam, they lost water. When they provoked and made fun of Moshe or didn't take him seriously enough, then guess what? They're not doing themselves or him any favors either. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do anything ultimately wrong. It was all for us, but it gave HaShem Yisborach the case to make against him in the heavenly court. That's enough to not go in. You're going to appeal for me to not to not carry out the sentence and keep you outside the land of Israel, or in keeping you outside the land of Israel, I should say. No, I'm afraid I need you outside in order to pick up those souls as well. And Moshe Rabbeinu accepts it. It's painful to him, but he accepts it. But that's the leaders of Klal Yisrael. And we don't really appreciate their greatness until we lose them. Big mistake. When we have great leaders, if you have, if I have, great Rabbonim that we're able to make connection with, cherish it, value it, listen to them, instead of going to challenge them, why did you? And take us to this place where we go say, forgive me, I don't understand, but wouldn't it be better if this? Ask, you'll get an explanation. Value the Rabbonim and value the leaders that Klal Yisrael have. When we didn't value the leaders of Klal Yisrael, that was the rebellion of Korah with disastrous consequences. We lost Bear Miriam because we didn't value that leader of Klal Yisrael. And all they're trying to do is to do the very best for us anyway. So cherish them when we have them. We'll see you again next week. Good job.